American history has two constants. One, we retell the past as if it were 200% prettier than it ever was. Two, the people who actually lived through that past were nowhere near as polished as the stories we like to tell. Hollywood wants you to believe the Wild West was full of handsome cowboys, shiny silver pistols, and sunsets so golden they looked hand painted. The truth felt more like the life of someone stressed, broke, and never sure where their next bucket of clean water would come from. The Wild West was not just wild. Sometimes it was dirty, deranged, and delightfully foolish. So, to begin our list of moments that make our ancestors look like they were playing life on hard mode, we start with the first story. Gentle, easy, soft. The way a tub filled with thin mud could be called soft. 1. Imagine riding a horse for days. Dust caked so thick on your skin that if you stood still long enough, someone could probably plant a cactus on your shoulder. You dream of a hot bath. Clean, private, quiet. But welcome to the real Wild West, where a single bath was shared by the entire household, and the order of who went first was as strict as a corporate board meeting. The father bathed first, the mother followed, then each child, oldest to youngest, took their turn being lowered into the same tub of water, water that grew murkier with every bath, like the 17th rinse of a sack of potatoes. And by the time it was finally your turn, the road-weary traveler hanging on to hope, whatever was in that tub could no longer be called water. It looked more like a mysterious stew made from sweat, dirt, and the quiet surrender of all expectations. You step in, hoping to get clean, and step out, feeling like you have been marinated in the entire family's DNA. Want to know the real Wild West? The real Wild West is that moment you catch yourself wondering why the bathwater has a taste. The Wild West, where people did not bathe to get clean, they bathed to survive. 2. If there is one place you would expect people to encourage gun carrying, gun flashing, even gun showing like medals, it would have to be Tombstone. The town of legendary gunmen, the place Hollywood paints as a non-stop runway of weapons. But then history steps forward and says, no, you all got that wildly wrong. The real Tombstone had some of the strictest gun control laws in the entire West. The moment you rode your horse into town, a deputy would walk up like a parking attendant and ask you to hand over every weapon you owned. Handguns, rifles, knives, even the kind of thing you assume no one would bother checking. They checked everything. Want to carry a gun inside town? Sorry, not happening. Please store it at your hotel or at the stables, the same way you would check a backpack at an airport. And here comes the biggest plot twist. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral, the one Hollywood turned into the symbol of cowboys shooting it out for honor, actually exploded because the lawmen, including the Earp brothers, were trying to arrest the other group for carrying weapons illegally, meaning the most iconic shootout in the entire Wild West was basically a violent version of you were told to check your gun and you refused. Tombstone, a town everyone imagines as a paradise of gun violence, but in reality, it operated like an airport without airplanes, just rules everywhere, and a whole lot of annoyed people. 3. In the Wild West, if you had a headache, felt worn out, had a dry cough, could not sleep, or were simply stressed from living in the 19th century, do not worry. The local pharmacist always had a solution, and that solution was usually drugs. Not metaphorical ones, actual drugs. Pharmacies back then worked like dangerous cocktail bars. Need something for a cough? Here's a syrup loaded with morphine. Your baby is teething and crying all night. No problem, give the little one Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. The main ingredient, morphine. Feeling drained, cocaine. Severe stress, try heroin while you are at it. Everything was sold freely, no prescription, no warnings, no instructions besides a cheerful line that said suitable for all ages. And coca, yes, exactly what you think. The original version contained real cocaine, and people drank it with the kind of alertness that probably made them feel like they could dig a well with their bare hands. The funniest part was that everyone believed these were miracle cures. No one questioned anything because yes, you did feel better. The kind of better where you could walk 20 miles without getting tired, or talk for 3 hours without stopping, or occasionally feel your heart race so fast you wondered if resigning from life might be an option. The Wild West did not just lack doctors, it had an excess of overly confident pharmacists. Out there, healing was not medicine. It was an extreme sport, a daily gamble to see whether you soared or simply passed out. 4. Deadwood sounds cool, like the kind of place where gunmen came to make legends and die in glory. But the reality was anything but romantic. In the 1880s, Deadwood was one of the rare towns where the smell alone could qualify as a biological weapon. If there were a ranking called places where you should not take a deep breath, Deadwood would land comfortably in the top three, right next to the dump and the portable restrooms at a music festival. The town exploded in population, but the concept of sanitation did not explode with it. Trash piled up behind houses, dead animals were left in the middle of the street like unwanted decorations, and wastewater flowed openly like tiny rivers straight out of the underworld. People described the smell as a strange mix of a tannery, a livestock market, and pure disappointment. The result was a stench strong enough to spark a typhoid outbreak in the most literal way possible. Deadwood was the kind of place where stepping outside to run simple errands, buying bread, grabbing a drink, and chatting with a neighbor meant you were also signing up for the bonus package of nausea, high fever, and deep regret about ever moving there. The funniest part was that the locals knew it stank. Everyone knew, but everyone was too busy chasing gold to bother cleaning anything. Priorities back then were simple. 1. Get rich. 2. Survive. Hygiene probably sat somewhere around rank 19. Deadwood stands as proof that sometimes a terrible smell is not just a smell, it is a lifestyle. 5. The cowboy Hollywood sells you is always a lone rider moving toward a sunset, gun glinting, posture saying I can handle everything on my own. But in real life, that cowboy looked a lot more like a delivery worker living off tips than a symbol of freedom. A cowboy was essentially a seasonal laborer, a gig worker of the 1800s. The horse was not his, the saddle was not his, and sometimes even the gun he carried was borrowed from the ranch owner. He earned low wages, worked from dawn to dark, slept outside, ate cold food, and was always in debt to the saloon. If there had been an app called Cowboy Hub, he would have taken extra shifts just to buy a new pair of boots. The funny part is that the people who romanticized cowboys the most were the ones who had never done the job a single day. Dime novels turned them into superhuman sharpshooters. But in reality, many cowboys wanted nothing to do with guns, because one bad shot could mean losing a whole month of pay to compensate for the damage. The real cowboy was not a symbol of boundless freedom. He was the symbol of low-wage work that required you to act cool about it. In other words, if you have ever worked a tough job and still ended the month eating instant noodles, congratulations, you understand cowboys better than any movie ever has. 6. If you think the biggest dangers in the Wild West were guns, venomous snakes, or bandits, congratulations. You have forgotten an even deadlier enemy, your own pants. Miners often used potassium nitrate to make explosives, and because life was too hard to bother changing clothes often, that chemical soaked straight into their trousers. Everything was fine until they stood too close to the campfire to dry off. One strong burst of heat and boom, the pants went off like holiday fireworks, and the miner's dignity flew farther than the fabric. Imagine surviving a mine collapse, outrunning bandits on your way home, only to be taken down by the very pants you were wearing. It is the kind of tragedy that would make Shakespeare stand up and applaud. What made it even more ridiculous was that coworkers rarely rushed in to help immediately, not because they were cruel, but because they were torn between two powerful emotions, concern for their friend and the overwhelming effort not to burst out laughing. Watching a miner scream and jump around because his pants ignited was not exactly a scene built for solemnity. To be fair, these accidents did push mining camps to take workplace safety more seriously. But the unfortunate lesson they took away was not to be careful with nitrate, but stay away from the fire unless you want to turn into a human firecracker. The Wild West, where your greatest enemy was sometimes the outfit you had on. 7. If men in the Wild West risked being betrayed by their own pants, the women were not any luckier. They were betrayed by fashion itself, specifically the corset, a garment designed with the philosophy that beauty matters more than breathing. Women were laced up so tightly their ribs creaked like old wooden floors, and they still rode horses, did housework, walked dusty roads, all while their organs were squeezed together like an overstuffed suitcase. That was not fashion. That was a test of human endurance. Imagine trying to climb onto a saddle, which was already inconvenient, while a cage made of metal and whalebone hugged your chest like it was hoping to take a few ribs home as souvenirs. People liked to joke that the Wild West was dangerous because of gunfights, but the real danger for women was collapsing from simply taking a deep breath. The wildest part was that many women voluntarily tightened their corsets until they could not bend down. Drop something, forget it. They had to ask someone else to pick it up. It was an era where loving your figure often meant being perfectly fine with fainting in public. And even though Western movies love to show women stepping gracefully out of stagecoaches, the truth is they likely had to stand against a wall afterward just to get enough oxygen back. The Wild West, a place where danger waited everywhere, even under the layers of your skirt. 8. No one knows who in the army woke up that morning and thought, horses are old news, what else has two wheels, cannot talk back, and costs less. And that is how the United States Army decided to experiment with bicycles. Yes, they truly imagined soldiers pedaling across deserts, mountains, and mud fields as if they were taking a casual ride through a weekend park. The plan sounded economical, but the reality looked more like a comedy show. Soldiers had to carry full weapons, backpacks, and rations, all stacked onto a bicycle that weighed as much as guilt itself. Then they were told to pedal over rocky dirt roads, through mud deep enough to swallow the wheels, and across desert sand that even modern cars complain about. The result was a parade of disasters: broken wheels, snapped chains, bent frames, and exhausted soldiers gasping like they had just run a marathon while hauling a bag of stones. A horse at least knows how to dodge potholes. A bicycle can only pray you survive long enough to ring its bell. Seriously, just imagine a troop of soldiers trying to chase bandits, and every downhill stretch turns into a slapstick scene. Men falling, bikes flipping, hats flying, and someone yelling, "Keep your balance, balance," like a kindergarten lesson. After a few journeys that looked like failed cartoon episodes, the Army gently concluded that bicycles were not suitable for battlefields, a discovery they probably should have made before sending soldiers pedaling halfway across the country. The Wild West, where ideas did not die because they were bad. They died because reality slapped them over and over. 9. If you think fake news was invented by the internet, welcome to the Wild West, where clickbait existed back when people still had to chop down trees just to print it. Newspapers followed one simple rule: if the truth was boring, inflate it until it sparkled. Papers freely published stories like a 30-meter monster discovered in a hidden valley, an old man growing a carrot the size of a child, or an alcohol-powered flying machine about to replace horses. You think those were jokes? No. They were printed, sold, and readers bought every copy. People back then were not just hungry for information, they were starving for drama. The funny part was that many stories were so obviously fabricated you could spot the lie from a mile away, but everyone still believed them because there was no Google to fact check, and journalists were paid based on how many papers they sold. Every time sales dropped, they simply thought, maybe today the town meets aliens. And just like that, entire communities would sit together, reading the paper and discussing it seriously as if they had uncovered proof of Bigfoot. The Wild West was not only a chaotic frontier, it was also a place where collective imagination reached its peak. In other words, people have not changed much. The only difference is that back then, they shared fake news by passing around a newspaper, not by hitting a share button. 10. People like to imagine life in the Wild West as evenings spent beside a crackling fire, sipping black coffee and staring at the stars like a cowboy poem. But that is the movie version. In real life, the thing burning in those fires was not wood. It was dried buffalo dung. On the Great Plains, trees were so rare you were more likely to run into a bandit than a piece of firewood. Settlers looked around and saw only two things: strong wind and buffalo droppings dried hard as crackers. And so buffalo chips, those round sun-baked patties, became the number one fuel for every household. A familiar scene: children running in the yard with baskets, collecting dung, and sorting it by which pieces would burn best. You might think it was punishment. It was not. It was a family chore. Burning buffalo dung was cheap, convenient, and long-lasting. But the smell was unforgettable. Not the cozy campfire scent, but a fragrance that blended livestock pens with a hot summer afternoon. Even so, frontier families cooked meals, heated water, and even baked bread over dung-fueled fires. Out on the frontier, you did not get to be picky. You burned whatever you could find. Newcomers to the West were horrified at first. But after one brutal winter, they became experts at dung burning, happily bragging to neighbors, "Our house found a great batch today, really dry, burns beautifully." The Wild West, where the romance of survival sometimes began with a pile of flammable dung. 11. Every time Hollywood talks about Wild Bill Hickok, they sprinkle an extra layer of legend on top of the truth. And the sweetest layer of all is the dead man's hand, the pair of aces and eights Hickok was supposedly holding when he was shot. A dramatic black-suited image perfect for the movies. Sounds like something a screenwriter cooked up. Well, that is because they probably did. The odds are high that no one ever actually saw that hand outside the imagination of later storytellers. In the records made at the time of Hickok's death, not a single witness bothered to write down what cards he was holding. No aces, no eights, no ominous omen. He was simply shot from behind in a cramped saloon filled with smoke, noise, and the clatter of cards on wood. A very ordinary, very chaotic, and completely uncinematic death. But decades later, someone finally said, "This story is a little bland. Let us add a dramatic hand of cards for depth." And just like that, the dead man's hand was born, an upgrade that turned a gray, messy reality into a polished legend, like adding a glowing filter to an old photo before posting it online. The funny part is that the made up detail became so famous that people remember the cards more than the way Hickok actually died. An entire tragedy compressed into two aces and two eights. The Wild West was a place where truth did not always win. What won was whatever story sounded better. 12. If you picture a cowboy with a wide-brimmed Stetson waving in the wind, my condolences. You have watched too many movies. In real life, a whole lot of cowboys wore bowler hats. Yes, the round, proper hat that screams London bank clerk. Not only did they wear it, but they liked it. The bowler did not fly off in strong wind, did not get in the way while riding, and was sturdy enough to serve as a barroom self-defense tool. One good swing of a bowler could leave someone dazed, while a Stetson was stylish, sure, but terrible in a fight. Picture a rugged cowboy with a dust-coated beard, a whip in hand, boots sunk in desert sand, and on his head, a hat that looks like he is about to attend a shareholders meeting. The image shatters the entire myth of the windswept cowboy and turns him into something between a British gangster and a frontier farmer. Many famous names of the era chose the bowler, Bat Masterson, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. Outlaws who looked as if they were 1 minute away from presenting their third quarter growth strategy. The look was so strange that Hollywood eventually said, "No, this will never look cool, let us fix it." And that is how the Stetson became the cowboy symbol, thanks to movie aesthetics, not history. The real Wild West was far less glamorous than we imagine, but it had its own charm. A place where men carried guns, rode horses, and still wore a hat that made them look like a banker who wandered into the desert. 13. If there were an award for creatures that do not exist but everyone is terrified of, the hoop snake would win first place. People in the Wild West believed there was a snake that could curl itself into a perfect circle, clamp down on its own tail, and roll downhill like a demonic wheel. Not only roll, but speed up, change direction, and chase you like an animal version of a runaway train. Sounds like a Looney Tunes sketch. It was, except people back then took it seriously. They told stories about encountering the hoop snake with the same solemn face someone would use to report an alien sighting. Some versions even claimed it had a venomous tail, meaning once it reached you, it would spring upright and stab you. A combo attack that defied every law of physics and anatomy. The amusing part was that no one ever caught one. No evidence existed, no carcass, nothing beyond campfire stories. But like every entertaining rumor, it thrived thanks to collective imagination and shared fear. What makes the tale even funnier is the image you have to picture. Rugged grown men stepping off the trail in panic because they imagined a rolling turbo snake barreling down the hill like a cursed wheel. They avoided slopes, took longer routes, and changed travel plans just to avoid becoming the target of something no one had ever seen. The Wild West truly was a place where danger lurked everywhere, sometimes real, sometimes manufactured entirely by pressure-fueled imagination. And the hoop snake is the classic example. 14. In the movies, a cowboy walks into a saloon, orders a glass of whiskey, throws it back in one clean motion, and wipes his mouth like a weathered hero. In real life, if you drank saloon whiskey from the Wild West, there was a good chance you would meet your ancestors earlier than planned, because whiskey back then was often 20% alcohol and 80% things that should only be found in a laboratory. To cut costs, saloon owners diluted whiskey with anything they could find: turpentine for bite, tobacco juice for color, gunpowder for a strong afterkick, even formaldehyde. Yes, the stuff used to preserve bodies. You were not drinking whiskey, you were taking a human endurance exam. Regulars called it rot gut, meaning your insides will regret this instantly. But most cowboys were broke, exhausted, and fresh off a week of outdoor labor, so they drank anyway. Not for enjoyment, just to forget reality for a moment, or to participate in a cheap gamble with their own health. And that was not all. Some bartenders pulled the sticky finger trick, coating their hands with wax so that each time they weighed gold dust for payment, they quietly stole a little extra from the customer, which meant you were drinking poison, getting robbed, and still smiling because you thought you were having an authentic cowboy whiskey experience. The Wild West was a place where you could be killed by guns, snakes, or bandits, but the drink in your glass was often the most lethal thing in the room. 15. Nothing captures the Wild West spirit of if it is edible, we will eat it quite like prairie oysters, a dish that sounds fancy enough to be served by the seaside but is actually deep-fried bull testicles. Yes, not oysters, not seafood, but a biological part that once belonged to a very surprised cow. This dish did not originate from a love of adventurous cuisine. It came from cattle castration season, producing so much spare material that someone looked at the pile and thought, frying these might taste good. A moment of inspiration that should probably raise questions about the mental state of whoever had that thought. The funniest part was how many newcomers to the West, especially travelers, saw prairie oysters on the menu and imagined a luxurious seafood feast in the middle of land where the nearest ocean was thousands of miles away. They ordered with excitement, built up expectations, and then experienced one of the frontier's classic culinary pranks. The twist is, the dish was actually not bad. Crispy, rich, perfectly fine with a little salt and pepper. And seeing a group of cowboys casually eating bull testicles like bar snacks was peak Wild West, rough, bizarre, and completely indifferent to how shocked you might be. In a place where people burned dung for cooking fuel and drank whiskey mixed with chemicals, turning bull testicles into a delicacy was not the least bit surprising. They simply wasted nothing, including things you would absolutely never admit to your family that you ate. 16. If you think modern criminals bragging on social media is something new, meet the outlaws of the Wild West. Men ruthless in real life but strangely soft when it came to public attention. Many of them did not flee far after committing a crime. No. They sat down, grabbed pen and paper, and wrote letters to newspapers to brag about what they had done. Some even corrected the details to protect their reputation. I did not rob 3 people, I robbed 5. Please report it correctly so I can maintain my standing. It sounded like influencers asking fans to fix their captions. Others sent taunting letters to lawmen, broadcasting an attitude of catch me if you can. The problem was that these letters were a gift from the heavens for the officers hunting them. The handwriting, the tone, the postmark, even the name of the courier carrying the mail, all became useful clues. In other words, outlaws turned themselves into weekly updates on their own movements. The funniest part was how many of them were caught not because they shot poorly or rode slow horses, but because they simply could not resist the spotlight. Some even asked reporters whether the public was impressed by last week's robbery. The Wild West was not only full of dangerous men, it was full of dangerous men who could not control their urge to do public relations, the earliest version of influencers, except instead of posting stories, they mailed in their crimes with ink and postage stamps. 17. If you think the streets of the Wild West were dangerous because of guns and bandits, prepare for a hidden final boss: horse manure. With horses as the main mode of transportation, the streets were essentially organic minefields. Walking through town was like playing a dodging game with smells you would never forget. Every day, hundreds of horses and mules left their gifts right in the middle of the road. No one cleaned, no one collected, and passers-by simply pretended they were used to stepping through a desert made entirely of dung. And the moment a light rain fell, the entire town transformed into a slippery, soupy mess with a stench strong enough to dry out your tear ducts. Many travelers wrote about having to cling to the edges of buildings, gripping walls like they were climbing a mountain just to avoid stepping into the thing history wisely chose not to describe in detail. Some towns even put up signs saying, "Be careful where you step," as if that solved anything. The funny part was how calm the locals were. They walked through it, nodding politely to each other as if the rising smell had nothing to do with them. It was the pure energy of, "I have lived here long enough, I am immune." Maybe that is the spirit of the Wild West. You could shoot fast, ride well, and survive harsh nature, but the true test of courage was walking down the street without looking down. 18. On the list of military ideas so bad they sound like jokes, raising camels for the United States Army sits easily near the top. Someone in the 19th century looked at a map of the American West, saw the deserts, and had a eureka moment. Deserts need camels. And so the government actually imported a whole herd from the Middle East to form the United States Camel Corps. The idea was not wrong at first. Camels are strong, endure thirst, and carry heavy loads. But after only 3 days of testing, everyone realized they had made a mistake on a national scale. First, camels smelled so awful that horses and mules panicked. They refused to go near them. One camel's roar could send an entire cavalry unit scattering like they had seen a demon. Next came the fact that American soldiers had no idea how to ride camels. They climbed on, got thrown off, climbed back on, got thrown again. The whole unit looked more like a circus parade than a fighting force. And camels, by nature, are moody, vindictive, and spit with sniper-level accuracy. But the final blow was the terrain. America is not the Sahara. Sharp rocks, hard gravel, thorny brush, all of it turned camel feet into pure misery. They moved slowly, stumbled constantly, and complained like they were filing official grievances against the government. After a few years of trying to convince reality to cooperate, the army gave up. The camels were sold off, released, or disappeared into the desert, becoming local legends. The Wild West had plenty of ridiculous ideas, but few ever reached the level of let us bring camels to America. What could possibly go wrong? 19. In the Wild West, you did not just dodge bullets, you also dodged horse manure, which covered the streets as if scattered by a giant seed spreader. With horses as the only transportation, nearly every square foot of ground felt like a danger tile in a smelly version of Minesweeper. Walking through town meant stepping carefully, toe by toe, like you were detecting mines using instinct alone. One wrong step and your boots officially joined the victims club. And do not expect anyone to clean it up. People were too busy surviving and far too used to the mess to care. A light rain was all it took to turn the entire street into a brown, slippery sea. Travelers wrote about clinging to walls, inching along like fugitives avoiding patrols, just to keep from slipping into the mixture history politely refuses to describe. Meanwhile, locals strolled past calmly, as if their sense of smell had retired years earlier. The danger was not only the odor. People slipped in the middle of the marketplace, landing hard. Crowds rushed over to check, then laughed. The only way to save face was to stand up quickly and pretend you did it on purpose. The Wild West had guns, bandits, and violence, but some days the biggest challenge was simply getting from point A to point B without stepping on something you absolutely did not want to step on. 20. In an era where everyone dreamed of getting rich overnight, the diamond hoax of 1872 proved one timeless rule. When greed speaks, the brain politely moves to the back seat. Two clever swindlers came up with a plan so simple it practically insulted the intelligence of the nation. Buy a bag of cheap gemstones, scatter them across a patch of barren Colorado land, and invite millionaire investors to discover a brand new diamond field. And then the unbelievable happened. Some of the wealthiest men in the country, including the founder of Tiffany and Company, saw the dusty sparkling stones and nodded with confidence like the world's top gem experts. No one checked the source. No one wondered why a supposedly massive diamond mine appeared in America as if dropped off by the universe. They invested millions, popped champagne, and celebrated as if they were about to become global gem tycoons. Meanwhile, the two con men stood off to the side, probably asking themselves, wait, this is actually working. Everything fell apart only when the government's geology expert arrived, looked around, and said, sorry, but these stones were sprinkled here by hand. By then, the money was gone, reputations were damaged, and America had to face the embarrassing truth. Some of its brightest financial minds had been defeated by a trick on the level of a children's prank. It was not just the biggest scam of its time. It was a classic reminder that in the Wild West, the most dangerous thing was not guns or bandits, but wealthy men deciding to turn their brains off. 21. If you think bartenders back then only poured drinks, you are mistaken. They were money hustlers with such refined skills that modern Las Vegas could hire them as instructors. In an era when transactions were often done with gold dust, every tiny grain carried real value. And that was exactly where bartenders showed their natural talent. The first trick was the weighted scale. You placed your gold on the counter, they set it on the scale, and then casually pressed a fingertip against the edge. Not hard, not obvious, just enough to tilt the balance toward the house as if the scale had a built-in loyalty program. You paid more without realizing you were funding the frontier version of local taxes. The second trick was the true masterpiece, the waxed thumb. Bartenders rubbed pomade or beeswax on the tip of their thumb. When you poured your gold out, they pretended to smooth it out for counting, while quietly taking back a little investment. With every transaction, a few grains of gold stuck to their thumb, tiny amounts that added up to a full barrel of chemically enhanced whiskey by the end of the week. The funny part was that everyone suspected it, but no one ever caught them in the act. The bartender stayed innocent, saying things like, "Gold sticking to my hand must be because you poured too hard." And the miners were too tired, too drunk, or too fed up with life to argue. In the Wild West, you could survive flying bullets and diamond scams, but walking into a saloon meant entering a casino where the house always won, sometimes thanks to a thumb that had been moisturized with great care. 22. In the 19th century, the greatest fear for many people was not getting shot, robbed, or stranded in the desert. It was being buried alive. The fear ran so deep that they invented a whole line of smart coffins, the ancestors of smart home devices, except designed for people who were supposed to be dead. These coffins came with mechanisms so inventive and desperate that you can instantly tell how anxious people were back then. Some had a rope running to the surface, attached to a tiny bell. If the person inside woke up, they could tug the rope and ring like they were ordering fast food. The upgraded models included air vents and a little flag so the revived occupant could wave hello to the rescue team. And the deluxe edition featured spring-loaded lids that would pop open like, "Surprise, I am not dead yet." The funniest part was that many cemeteries hired night guards whose job was to listen for bells. Imagine the poor watchman hearing a faint ring at midnight and wondering, was that the wind, a cat, or someone asking for a second chance at life? As bizarre as it sounds today with the medical accuracy of that era, being buried alive was not a myth. It was a probability. And instead of accepting the risk, humans did what humans always do. They built strange gadgets to save themselves, even after being declared dead. The Wild West was truly a place where even lying quietly in a coffin was not simple. 23. The Pony Express is often told as one of the coolest legends of the West. Young riders charging through sandstorms and snowy mountains, carrying mail that connected the entire country. It sounds epic, like the trailer of a blockbuster film. Then you learn the truth, and, well, it looks a lot more like a cash burning startup than a legend. The service existed for exactly 19 months, not 19 years, not 19 seasons. 19 months. A human pregnancy lasts longer than the entire operational history of the Pony Express. Why? Because they burned money like they were racing to bankruptcy. Horses were expensive, relay stations were expensive, riders risked their lives daily, and just when things finally started to run smoothly, someone strung a telegraph line across the continent. The telegraph delivered messages in minutes. The Pony Express delivered them in days. That competition did not even require a second round. So the service shut down, debts piled up, and the legend people celebrate today mostly came from newspapers and Hollywood deciding to season the story to make it sound less tragic. But the funny part is this. Even though it failed as a business, the Pony Express became insanely iconic in American culture. It is like a band that released only one album, broke up immediately, but the album was so good that people worship it for generations. In the Wild West, even failure could become legendary, as long as you rode fast enough and went down before anyone had time to read your financial report. 24. If you think modern elections are stressful, take a look at the Wild West, where democracy operated under one simple rule: whoever cheated more creatively won. There were no automatic counters, no independent monitors, just strong whiskey, short tempers, and flexible morals. Before Election Day, candidates often campaigned by giving voters a free glass of whiskey. Not souvenirs, not posters, but a drink handed directly to you. If you remembered your original candidate after finishing it, that meant you had the willpower of iron. But that was only level 1. Level 2 was stuffing the ballot box with pre-filled votes, the quantity depending entirely on the candidate's confidence or desperation. Level 3 was hiring tough men to stand outside polling stations, gently persuading voters to choose the right person. And level 4 was where creativity truly shone, registering voters under the names of the dead, historical figures, and even household pets. Some records even noted voter cannot appear due to having passed away last year. The funny part was that everyone knew cheating was happening, but they accepted it because they believed their side cheated better than the other. Elections became a parallel competition between politics and the art of bending rules. If you ever feel that modern democracy has issues, just remember the Wild West once had an election where the number of votes exceeded the number of residents. And that was only the first Tuesday of the month. 25. In the Wild West, if you had a toothache, needed a haircut, or were shot in the backside, you did not go to three different places. You went to one place, the barber shop. It sounded convenient, but in reality, it felt like stepping into a hybrid of a salon, a clinic, and a crime scene. The frontier barber was the living definition of forced multitasking. In the morning, he trimmed his hair. At noon, he yanked out teeth using the same pliers he used to fix his scissors. In the afternoon, he stitched up gunshot wounds without anesthesia, telling the customer to bite down on a cloth and hold still. And the towel he used to wipe the razor was the same towel he used to wipe the scalpel. One swipe across the chair and it looked clean enough. The germs could fend for themselves. Historical accounts mention barbers sometimes leaving bits of hair stuck to the blade before using that same blade to lance an abscess for the next customer. If that sounds unsanitary, remember that the medical standard of the time was not to let the patient faint in the middle of the procedure. And do not forget the iconic red and white barber pole. You might think it represented hair artistry. It did not. It symbolized blood and bandages, a rotating advertisement for the barber's unofficial medical services. Back then, you did not step into a barber shop for a new look. You stepped, hoping you would walk back out in one piece. 26. Today, calling someone a cowboy sounds cool, like every step they take should have its own guitar soundtrack. But in the real Wild West, calling someone a cowboy was the same as calling them a reckless street kid. It was an insult, not a badge of honor. Hollywood would probably faint if it heard the truth. Cowboys back then were the lowest tier of the social food chain. They were poor, young, slept outdoors, ate cheap food, and worked jobs so brutal their spines probably wished they could resign. In some legal documents, cowboy was used to describe troublemakers or hot-headed youths likely to pick fights. Being labeled a cowboy meant this guy was probably drunk last night, started a brawl, and lost someone else's cattle. But then came newspapers, dime novels, and eventually Hollywood, all deciding that the word sounded cool. And just like that, the people once seen as dirt-cheap labor were reborn as symbols of masculinity, freedom, adventure, and movie-ready sharpshooting. It is one of history's greatest glow-ups, from a low-level insult to a glamorous figure plastered on film posters. If real 19th century cowboys came back and saw statues of themselves in public squares, they would probably say, "Hold on, you're all messing with me, right?" 27. If you imagine the Wild West as a paradise of stone-cold gunmen hitting flies from 3 miles away, sorry, Hollywood sold you a dream. The truth was far less glamorous. Most people who carried guns back then were more likely to shoot themselves than their enemies. That is not a metaphor. It is an unofficial statistic that feels very believable once you see how they handled their weapons. Plenty of men bought their first revolver while drunk, and instead of practicing, they shoved it straight into their waistband. No holster, no safety, no clue how the trigger worked. Just blind confidence and enough alcohol to turn them into a hazard to themselves. The result was a long list of creative self-inflicted injuries. Some shot holes through their boots while trying to tuck the gun into their belt. Some shot holes through the bar after tripping on the stairs. Some managed to shoot themselves in the backside while trying to sit down. There are even reports of cowboys shooting themselves in the leg while attempting to clean the barrel with the corner of their shirt. That is why the frontier barber surgeon was always busy. Not because of dramatic duels, but because half the town kept participating in accidental self-shooting like it was a weekly hobby. The real scene in the Wild West was not two men waiting for high noon with steely eyes. It was a guy hopping on one foot, clutching his leg, yelling, "The gun betrayed me." If guns had emotions, they would probably wonder, "I am here to protect you. Why do you insist on injuring yourself?" 28. If you think moving houses today is torture, imagine living in the Wild West, where moving house literally meant moving the entire house. No unscrewing, no demolishing. Just drag the whole building as if it were a slightly oversized suitcase. In new frontier towns that popped up across empty plains, people built so fast that no one bothered with foundations or planning. And one day, a saloon owner might look across the street, notice the other side had more customers, and simply decide, "All right, I am moving my bar over there," as casually as rearranging a table. So an ox team was summoned. The building was lifted onto round logs, acting as makeshift wheels. And the next morning, the townsfolk woke up to a legendary sight: the saloon peacefully rolling past their front doors, as if it had personally decided the other side of the road looked more fun. Sometimes entire blocks shifted in a single day, 2 or 3 buildings at a time, to get closer to a well or farther from feuding neighbors. The whole scene looked like children playing with giant life-sized Lego pieces that required outrageous effort. The funniest part was how normal everyone thought it was, casually saying things like, "My house moved 8 meters today, still gets good sunlight." In a place where entire buildings could stand up and stroll to a new spot just because the owner felt like it, you were not just living in a town. You were living in an amusement park dedicated to breaking the laws of common sense. 29. If any dish was ever born from pure, concentrated pettiness, it was the Hangtown Fry, a flashy skillet of eggs whose origin story is as dark as the town it came from. Legend has it that in Placerville, a place where nooses were more common than bar signs, a condemned prisoner decided to pull off one final act of mischief. The night before his execution, he was asked what he wanted for his last meal. Some people choose comfort food, others choose something symbolic. He chose the meal guaranteed to irritate the cook the most: fresh oysters and eggs. In the mountains of the 1800s, those ingredients were as rare and expensive as finding Wi-Fi in the desert. To fulfill his request, people had to haul oysters over mountain roads and keep them chilled the entire way. The logistics alone could drive any cook into a career change. But instead of losing his temper, the cook got creative. He tossed the oysters with eggs, fried them up with bacon, and accidentally invented a dish that sounded luxurious, but at its core was a culinary you served from the heart. The strangest part was how much the townsfolk loved it. Hangtown Fry went from a spite-fueled prank to a local delicacy, served in restaurants as if it were high mountain cuisine. No one remembers the name of the prisoner, but they remember the dish he used to annoy an entire town. A culinary legacy born out of spite, pure Wild West energy. 30. Amid all the chaos of the Wild West, the gunfire, the chemically tampered beer, the men accidentally shooting themselves in the leg, people somehow still found time to invent one of the dumbest sports in American history: the contest for who could spit chewing tobacco the farthest. No stadium, no referee, no tickets. All it took was a few bored men, an open patch of dirt, and enough chewing tobacco to knock out the digestive system of a full-grown bull. They would gather, chests puffed out, hands on hips, staring at each other with the seriousness of Olympic athletes, and then decide who could launch a stream of brown spit the farthest. There were two main categories: distance and accuracy. The most common target was the spittoon, a small metal can. The second most common target was any unlucky bug that wandered across the field. In every case, a man's honor depended entirely on the flight path of a liquid that no doctor would ever recommend swallowing. The winner was celebrated like a champion, treated to free drinks, and granted the right to retell his victory for an entire year. The loser received the twin rewards of public humiliation and the privilege of cleaning the grounds. It was a moment that perfectly captured the spirit of the Wild West: not grand, not glamorous, but proudly and wholeheartedly ridiculous. And that ridiculousness is exactly what makes this era too entertaining to ignore. And there you have it, the pinnacle of the sport called "I am bored enough to invent something truly stupid." But now I really want to know, out of the 30 absurd moments we just went through, which one hit the top for you? The miner's pants exploding, the houses rolling across town, or the spit-off that somehow had stricter rules than some real sports? Leave me a comment with your favorite moment, because I am willing to bet everyone will pick a different flavor of foolishness. And if these stories made history easier to swallow than a plate of crispy prairie oysters, well, you know what to do. Go ahead and hit subscribe. No nooses, no high noon duels, just one light click, like a cowboy plucking a guitar string. And in return, you will never miss another delightfully chaotic tour of history.